I will snap your arm in front of your little girl. My brother-in-law sneered as he threw his heavy, mixed martial arts gloves directly at my chest. He thought he was intimidating a helpless, grieving widow who pushed paper at a boring desk job. He had absolutely no idea he had just threatened a special operations major who spent the last decade neutralizing high-value targets in the Middle East. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family bully who severely underestimated what you are capable of. My name is Hannah, and I am 33 years old. I never expected to be a widow so young. 6 months ago, my husband Mark, a dedicated police officer, died in the line of duty. Since then, my focus has been entirely on protecting our 7-year-old daughter Lily. Mark was the only person who truly understood me, and the only one who knew the reality of my career. To the rest of the world, including my deeply toxic biological family, I am just an administrative assistant for the Department of Defense. They think I file paperwork, staple memos, and fetch coffee. They do not know I am a combat veteran and a highly trained operative. We were at my sister Paige and her husband Dion's sprawling suburban house for a family barbecue. Dion is a towering former professional fighter. He is an African-American man with shoulders as wide as a doorframe and a massive ego to match. He recently opened a chain of martial arts gyms and loved to remind everyone how tough and wealthy he supposedly was. I hated going to their house, but my mother Barbara had manipulated me into attending. She claimed it would be good for Lily to be around family after losing her father. It was anything but good. We were standing on the manicured back lawn when Dion's massive off-leash pit bull suddenly charged at Lily. The dog bared its teeth and snapped its heavy jaws just inches from my daughter's fragile leg. Lily screamed in absolute terror and scrambled behind me, her small hands gripping the back of my shirt so hard her knuckles turned white. I immediately stepped between my child and the dog, lowering my center of gravity instinctively, my muscles coiling in preparation to neutralize the animal if it lunged again. "Dion," I said, keeping my voice calm and perfectly steady, "you need to put your dog on a leash right now. He is scaring Lily and he just tried to bite her." Dion was standing by the expensive outdoor grill, surrounded by his gym buddies. Instead of apologizing or calling his aggressive dog back, he threw his head back and laughed loudly. The booming sound grated against my ears. He reached into his gym bag, sitting on a nearby patio chair, pulled out a pair of heavy sweat-soaked fighting gloves, and hurled them straight at me. They hit my chest with a dull thud and fell to the grass. "Look at you, Dion," mocked his voice echoing across the yard so every single guest could hear. "You are so weak and pathetic, Hannah. You jump at shadows, just like a scared little mouse. Mark is not around to protect you anymore. You are just a defenseless widow pushing paper at some dead-end administrative job. You have absolutely zero spine." I did not flinch. I kept my eyes locked securely on his. My mother Barbara was lounging on a patio sofa, sipping a vibrant cocktail. She did not even look up from her phone to check if her own granddaughter was safe from the dog. Paige walked over and wrapped her arm around Dion's massive bicep, smirking at me like I was a piece of garbage, ruining their perfect afternoon. "If you want me to leash my dog, you have to earn it," Dion challenged, stepping closer to me until he was towering over my personal space. "In fact, I will make you a deal. Tonight is the grand opening of my new gym branch. We are hosting exhibition fights in the octagon. I want you to step into the cage with me, just you and me." The guests around the grill snickered. Paige actually clapped her hands in delight, as if watching her younger sister get beaten up was prime entertainment. "If you can survive exactly 1 minute in the cage with me without tapping out or crying for your mommy, I will leash the dog, and I will never bother you again." Dion sneered, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. "But when you lose, and you will lose in the first 10 seconds, you have to sign over Mark's $200,000 life insurance policy to me. I need that capital for my business expansion, and you are too mentally fragile to handle that kind of money anyway." He spat on the grass right next to my tactical boots. "Pick up the gloves, Hannah," he threatened, his eyes narrowing with malicious intent. "Pick them up, or I swear I will put you in the hospital right here in front of your crying kid. I will snap your arm like a twig, and no one in this family will stop me." I stood entirely still, analyzing the man standing before me. He was broad-heavy and relied entirely on brute force and intimidation. His stance was sloppy, his weight unevenly distributed. He saw a grieving mother in a simple t-shirt and jeans. He saw an easy target to bully out of $200,000. He did not see the countless hours of close-quarters combat training. He did not see the classified missions in hostile territories where I had to fight my way out of rooms filled with armed insurgents. He did not see the lethal operative hiding perfectly in plain sight. I glanced back at Lily, making sure she was a safe distance away. Then, I slowly bent down and picked up the foul-smelling gloves from the grass. "I accept your challenge, Dion," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, deadpan register. 1 minute in the octagon tonight. The entire yard erupted in mocking laughter. Dion pounded his chest, howling with amusement, while Paige pointed at me, calling me a delusional fool. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, they failed to notice that my hands were not shaking, and my breathing had not hitched. They thought they had cornered a sheep. They were completely unaware they had just locked themselves in a cage with a wolf. The mocking laughter from the backyard crowd washed over me like a wave of toxic sludge. Dion continued to pound his massive chest, playing the role of the alpha male for his gym buddies and business partners. He was reveling in the spectacle of humiliating a widow. But before the echo of his taunts could fade, the sliding glass door of the patio ripped open. My older sister Paige marched out holding a crystal champagne flute in one hand and pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me with the other. Paige was the golden child of our family. She had always been my mother Barbara's absolute favorite. Today she was dressed head to toe in designer labels that cost more than my first car. She strutted across the manicured lawn, her expensive heels sinking slightly into the grass, and placed herself right next to Dion. She did not look at her terrified 7-year-old niece clutching my leg. She only looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Hannah Page snapped, her voice shrill enough to silence the laughing crowd. "You actually think you can step into a ring with a former champion? You cannot even manage a simple conversation without acting like a victim. Just give Dion the money and stop making a massive scene in front of our guests." I kept my stance relaxed, but my eyes locked on my sister. She was doing what she had done our entire lives. She was rewriting the narrative to make me the villain, while demanding I hand over everything I had. "You are being incredibly selfish, Hannah," Paige continued loudly, ensuring every single person at the barbecue could hear her. "Mark died 6 months ago. He was a good cop, and he left you a $200,000 life insurance payout. That money is just sitting in a bank account doing absolutely nothing while my husband is trying to build a fitness franchise that will support this entire family. Dion offered to multiply that money for you. He offered to let you invest in his new location. Instead, you are hoarding it like a greedy little dragon while living off your pathetic government desk job salary." The audacity of her words felt like a physical blow. She was using my dead husband's ultimate sacrifice to shame me into funding Dion's shady business ventures. Mark had worked overtime, night after night, risking his life on the streets just to ensure Lily and I would have a safety net if the worst ever happened. Paige spoke about his death as if it were a winning lottery ticket she was entitled to cash. Before I could respond, my mother Barbara chimed in from her padded lounge chair on the patio. She did not even bother to stand up. She simply waved her hand dismissively at me. "Listen to your sister, Hannah," Barbara shouted across the yard. "You have always been so incredibly dramatic and unstable. Ever since Mark passed away, your mental state has been a complete disaster. You are far too fragile to handle that kind of money by yourself." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling the familiar cold realization that I had never truly had a mother. Barbara had spent my entire childhood destroying my confidence to protect Paige's fragile ego. When I earned a full academic scholarship to a prestigious university, Barbara had literally torn the acceptance letter in half. She told me I was not allowed to celebrate because Paige had just failed her college entrance exams the very same week, and my success was making my sister feel bad. When I quietly joined the military instead, Barbara told the entire neighborhood I had run away from home because I was a delinquent. Every achievement of mine was a threat to her golden child. "Go to your car right now, Hannah," Barbara commanded, her tone shifting from dismissive to purely authoritative. "Bring me your checkbook. You are going to sign that $200,000 over to Dion's company today. He will give you a small monthly allowance to feed Lily. That is more than generous, considering how ungrateful you are acting. Do not force Dion to hurt you tonight just because you are too stubborn to accept our help." I looked down at Lily. My brave little girl was quietly weeping, her face pressed against my tactical pants. She did not understand the financial extortion happening around us, but she understood the hostility. I gently stroked her hair, keeping my physical movements entirely non-threatening. My operational training had taught me how to compartmentalize rage. In my mind, I was already executing a tactical breakdown of the entire property, assessing the exits, evaluating Dion's private security guards standing by the fence, and cataloging every admission of financial coercion Paige and Barbara were loudly making in front of witnesses. "I am not signing over Mark's life insurance," I stated, my voice cutting clearly through the humid afternoon air. "That money belongs to Lily. It is her college fund, it is her future." Dion laughed, a harsh, booming sound that made Lily flinch. "Then you better show up at the grand opening tonight, little mouse," he taunted, stepping forward to intimidate me with his sheer size. "Because if you do not step into that cage and take your beating like a good girl, I am coming to your house tomorrow, and I will not be asking politely for that check." Paige whipped out her latest model smartphone and immediately opened her social media app. She hit the live broadcast button and shoved the camera right into my face. "Hey everyone," Paige announced to her thousands of followers, her voice dripping with venomous glee. "My delusional sister Hannah just challenged my husband to a cage fight tonight at the new gym opening. Who wants to take bets on how many seconds it takes for Dion to send her to the emergency room? She thinks her boring desk job at the Department of Defense gave her superpowers. Make sure you all tune in tonight to watch her get exactly what she deserves." She shoved the phone closer, trying to provoke a reaction. She wanted me to cry. She wanted me to scream or beg or look like the unhinged widow they were trying so desperately to paint me as. Instead, I looked directly into the camera lens. My face was a mask of absolute, terrifying calm. I did not blink. I did not break eye contact. "I will see you at 8 o'clock, Dion," I said. I turned my back on the man threatening my life, the sister filming my humiliation, and the mother demanding my financial ruin. I picked up my daughter, holding her securely against my chest, and walked straight toward my car. The chorus of insults and mocking laughter followed me all the way down the driveway. They thought they had successfully bullied a traumatized civilian into a brutal physical and financial submission. They were blindly walking into a catastrophic trap, and I was going to be the one to pull the lever. The heavy thud of my car door shutting finally cut off the sound of my family's mocking laughter. I strapped Lily into her booster seat in the back of my modest sedan. Her small hands were still shaking violently. "Mommy, is Uncle Dion going to hurt you?" she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. I adjusted the rearview mirror to meet her frightened eyes. "Nobody is going to hurt us, baby," I said, projecting absolute calm. "I promise you." As I pulled out of the sprawling driveway of Paige's massive suburban estate, my phone, resting in the center console, began to vibrate violently. It was a relentless, continuous buzzing that signaled a digital avalanche. I did not need to look at the screen to know what was happening. Paige had unleashed her social media followers. When I hit the first red light, I glanced down at the glowing screen. My notifications were a chaotic blur of text messages, missed calls, and social media tags. Our extended family group chat was exploding with absolute vitriol. My Aunt Susan texted Hannah, "You are completely out of your mind. Go back and apologize to Dion right now before he ruins you." My cousin Greg chimed in saying, "Mark would be so ashamed of how selfish you are acting today. It is just money, Hannah. Give it to them and stop being a burden." Another message from my mother Barbara read, "You are a terrible mother for traumatizing Lily like this. When you end up in the hospital tonight, I am calling Child Protective Services to take that poor girl away from you." Paige had uploaded the live video of the glove-throwing incident. She titled it, "My Delusional Sister Thinks She Can Fight an MMA Champion." The video already had thousands of views, and the numbers were climbing rapidly. I could see the comments scrolling across the preview screen. Strangers were calling me a greedy widow, a terrible mother, a lunatic who needed to be locked in a psychiatric ward. Paige had masterfully framed the entire encounter to make Dion look like a generous, successful businessman, offering a struggling widow a chance to invest her money wisely. Meanwhile, I was painted as a psychotic hoarder, refusing to help her own blood relatives. They were actively trying to build a public case against my mental stability. They wanted a digital paper trail to justify taking custody of Lily and seizing Mark's life insurance when I inevitably failed in the cage. It was a calculated assassination of my character. The military had spent millions of dollars training me to withstand intense psychological warfare and hostile interrogations. A few nasty text messages from a narcissistic mother and an entitled sibling were nothing compared to what I had endured during my service. I ignored the barrage of notifications and kept my eyes on the road. I pulled into my own driveway. Our house was small, unassuming, and tucked away in a quiet residential neighborhood. It was the safe haven Mark and I had built, far away from my toxic relatives. I unbuckled Lily and walked her directly across the street to Mrs. Higgins' house. Mrs. Higgins was a retired trauma nurse and one of the few people in this world I trusted implicitly. When she opened the door, she immediately sensed the tension radiating from my posture. "Can Lily stay with you for the evening?" I asked, keeping my tone light and cheerful for my daughter's sake. "We are having a special movie night, just the two of us," Mrs. Higgins said smoothly, ushering Lily inside with a warm, welcoming smile. "Take all the time you need, Hannah." I hugged Lily tight, kissed her forehead, and promised I would be back before she woke up in the morning. I walked back across the street and stepped into my empty house. The silence of the living room was absolute. A normal person in my situation, a grieving widow bullied by her entire family and challenged to a brutal cage fight by a massive professional fighter, would have collapsed on the living room floor in tears. They would have panicked, they would have frantically called the police or called Dion begging for mercy. I did not shed a single tear. My heart rate rested at a perfectly calm 60 beats per minute. My breathing was slow and entirely controlled. I walked down the hallway and entered my home office. To anyone else, it looked exactly like the workspace of a mid-level government paper pusher. There were stacks of manila folders, a standard-issue desktop monitor, and generic office supplies. I walked over and locked the heavy, solid oak door before pulling down the reinforced blackout shades over the windows. I approached my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pressed a concealed biometric button under the wooden panel. A hidden compartment clicked open with a quiet mechanical hiss. I reached in and pulled out a heavy matte black tactical laptop. I opened the lid and pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner while leaning in for the retinal sweep. The screen glowed green, analyzing my identity. A warning flashed across the screen, confirming my top-secret security clearance. The United States Army Special Operations Command seal appeared on the dark monitor. My family thought I filed supply requisitions and managed travel itineraries for low-ranking officers. They thought I was weak, broken, and entirely defenseless. They were about to find out exactly what kind of paperwork I truly handled. The green glow of the biometric scanner illuminated the dark room as my identity was verified. The screen transitioned from a generic desktop background to the highly classified interface of the United States Army Special Operations Command Network. I bypassed the standard military portals and accessed a restricted Joint Task Force server shared directly with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My family believed I had spent the last 6 months doing nothing but crying in my bedroom, entirely broken by the tragic loss of my husband. They thought my grief had turned me into a weak and pliable target. They were wrong on every single count. I had grieved for Mark. I loved him with everything I had. But my grief had not broken me. It had sharpened me into a razor edge. For the past half-year, I had been running a covert financial tracking operation right from this very desk. The operation was originally focused on dismantling a massive narcotics cartel operating across the East Coast. My team specialized in following the money. Drug lords generated millions in dirty cash, and they needed legitimate businesses to wash those funds before they could enter the mainstream economy. 3 months ago, my financial tracking algorithms caught a massive anomaly. Millions of dollars in untraceable cash were being funneled through a rapidly expanding chain of mixed martial arts facilities. The cash was being disguised as premium membership packages, personal training sessions, and bulk merchandise sales. I dug deeper into the corporate ownership records and uncovered a truth that made my blood run cold. The owner of the gyms laundering money for one of the most violent cartels in the country was none other than Dion, my own brother-in-law. I stared at the glowing financial records scrolling across my secure monitor. Dion loved to brag about his business acumen. Paige constantly flaunted her designer bags, luxury cars, and expensive vacations, attributing them to her husband's success as an entrepreneur. My mother Barbara praised Dion as the ultimate provider and the perfect son-in-law. None of them knew that their entire, lavish lifestyle was funded by blood money. Dion was nothing more than a glorified washing machine for drug traffickers. But Dion was not just a criminal. He was an arrogant and reckless fool. I opened the latest intercept file on my screen. My team had tapped Dion's encrypted communications 2 weeks ago. The transcripts revealed exactly why he was acting so unhinged at the family barbecue today. Dion had not demanded Mark's life insurance policy out of mere greed. He was desperate. He was a dead man walking. Over the past few months, Dion had quietly siphoned off $200,000 of the cartel's dirty money. He used those stolen funds to maintain his wealthy facade, to buy Paige a new sports car, and to cover the exorbitant construction costs of his new gym location. He thought the cartel bosses would not notice a slight discrepancy in the massive volume of cash moving through his accounts. He severely underestimated the ruthless people he was working for. The cartel auditors had caught the missing funds. They gave Dion a terrifying ultimatum. He had to replace the stolen $200,000 of clean cash by the night of his new gym's grand opening, or they would eliminate him permanently. That was the real reason behind his sudden, aggressive focus on me. Dion knew exactly how much Muck's life insurance payout was worth. He needed that specific amount of clean, untraceable money to pay off violent drug lords and save his own life. He was perfectly willing to steal the future of a 7-year-old girl and bankrupt a grieving widow to cover his own fatal mistakes. He had manipulated Paige and Barbara into helping him pressure me using their natural toxicity and hatred of me to his advantage. They thought they were helping Dion secure an investment. They were actually acting as accomplices to extortion on behalf of a violent cartel. Mark was a good cop who dedicated his life to taking dangerous narcotics off the streets. Dion was actively helping criminals flood those same streets with poison just to buy fancy items for my sister. The poetic justice of using my special operations resources to destroy the exact criminal network my husband fought against was not lost on me. I was not just protecting Lily's future tonight. I was honoring Mark's legacy. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair and let out a slow, steady breath. The pieces of the puzzle were completely locked into place. Paige posting that live video on social media mocking me and demanding I hand over the money was the greatest gift she could have ever given a federal prosecutor. She had publicly documented their attempt to extort money from me, cementing her own role in the conspiracy. My family had handed me the final nails for their own coffins. I watched the real-time surveillance feeds on my secondary monitor. The cameras positioned outside Dion's new gym showed delivery trucks arriving and staff setting up for the grand opening event tonight. The cartel bosses would be sitting in the VIP section, expecting their payment. Dion believed he could beat me to a pulp in the octagon, force me to sign the insurance transfer, and hand the money over to his dangerous associates before the night ended. He thought he was the predator, setting a trap for a helpless mouse. He did not realize the entire building was a federal kill box, and I was the one holding the remote detonator. The silence of my secure office was broken by the sharp trill of my encrypted communication device. It was a secure satellite phone resting next to my keyboard. I picked it up and pressed the green button. "Major Hannah?" I answered my voice, crisp and authoritative. On the other end of the line was General Thompson, my direct commanding officer. His voice was gravelly and strictly professional. "Major, we have successfully reviewed the final financial intercepts," he said. "The federal judge just signed off on the package. We have blanket warrants for money laundering, extortion, and racketeering. The federal field office has designated their tactical units to our command for the evening." I pulled up the tactical blueprints for Dion's gym on my screen, marking the primary exits and the structural weak points of the building. "Excellent news, General," I replied. "The strike teams are fully briefed and awaiting your final call." General Thompson continued, "Do we raid Dion's gym tonight?" I looked at the bruising on my knuckles, a physical reminder of the years of rigorous combat training that had forged me into a weapon. I thought about the cruel laughter of my mother, the venomous taunts from my sister, and the terrifying threat Dion had made against my little girl. They wanted a show tonight. I was going to give them a spectacle they would never forget for the rest of their lives. "Yes, General," I said, a cold smile forming on my lips. "Position the tactical teams outside the perimeter and tell them to wait for my signal. I have a 1-minute round scheduled in the octagon tonight. We execute the raid the second the bell rings." General Thompson's voice came through the encrypted satellite phone with the crisp efficiency I had relied on during countless overseas deployments. He was ready to give the order to breach the building and arrest everyone inside. "General," I said, keeping my tone completely level, "I need you to hold the SWAT teams outside the venue, establish a hard perimeter around the entire city block, cover every exit, every loading dock, and every back alleyway, but do not breach the doors until you receive my direct signal." "Are you certain, Major?" he asked. "We have eyes on the cartel lieutenants. They are already moving into the VIP section of the gym. They are heavily armed and extremely dangerous. If they sense a trap, they will not hesitate to use lethal force." "I am certain," I replied. "Dion invited me to a public spectacle. He wants an audience to watch him humiliate me. If we breach the building too early, we risk a massive shootout in a crowded arena full of innocent civilians. I will step into the octagon with him. All eyes will be on the cage. The cartel bosses will be entirely focused on the fight, waiting for Dion to secure their money. They will be relaxed and completely distracted. That is exactly when I will trigger the signal." "Understood," Major Thompson said. "My men are at your command. We wait for your mark. Good hunting out there." I ended the transmission and secured the biometric lock on my laptop. The financial data, the wiretaps, and the tactical blueprints faded to black. I stood up from my desk and walked down the quiet hallway to my bedroom. The house was utterly still without Lily running around, but that silence gave me the clarity I needed. It was time to get ready for war. I walked past my closet full of civilian clothes. The pastel blouses and tailored slacks I wore to my government desk job were useless tonight. I went to the heavy storage trunk at the bottom of my closet and unlocked the heavy brass padlock. I bypassed the standard mixed martial arts gear that most fighters wore. I was not walking into a sporting event. I was walking into a federal raid. I pulled out a pair of black tactical combat pants woven from reinforced ripstop fabric designed to withstand harsh desert environments. I paired it with a dark, moisture-wicking compression shirt that acted like a second skin. It offered maximum mobility without giving an opponent anything loose to grab onto. I laced up my lightweight tactical boots, securing them tightly around my ankles. I tied my hair back into a tight braided bun, ensuring not a single strand would impair my vision or offer a handhold. Finally, I reached into the hidden compartment of my trunk and pulled out a specialized, high-frequency tactical whistle. It was small enough to palm in my hand, but loud enough to pierce through the loudest arena noise. This was the signal. I slipped it securely into a zippered pocket on my thigh. Fully dressed in my combat gear, I paused in front of the tall mirror resting in the corner of my bedroom. The reflection staring back at me was not the broken, weeping widow my family believed me to be. The posture was rigid. The eyes were calculating and cold. The transformation was complete. The mouse they had bullied all afternoon was gone. The Special Operations Major had officially clocked in. I turned away from the mirror, and my gaze fell upon the framed photograph resting on my nightstand. It was a picture of Mark in his formal police uniform, smiling brightly on the day he received his detective shield. My chest tightened with a profound, aching love. I walked over and gently picked up the silver frame, brushing my thumb across the glass. Mark was the only man who truly knew the depth of my capabilities. He never felt emasculated by the fact that his wife was a lethal federal operative. He was incredibly proud of me. But more importantly, Mark was an honest, dedicated cop who despised corruption. He had spent his entire career putting violent criminals behind bars. He hated how my family treated me. He saw right through Barbara's narcissistic manipulation and Paige's endless greed. He knew Dion was nothing but a flashy, arrogant bully hiding behind expensive cars and gold chains. Mark used to beg me to cut them out of our lives completely. I only kept them at a comfortable distance to maintain my civilian cover story and to give Lily the illusion of an extended family. Now I realized exactly how right my husband had been. Mark worked grueling night shifts, risking his life on dangerous streets to build a safety net for his family. He paid into that $200,000 life insurance policy so that if he ever failed to come home, his little girl would be guaranteed a college education and a secure future. He sacrificed his life protecting this city. And now, Dion wanted to take that sacred money and hand it over to the exact same violent drug cartels that Mark had sworn to destroy. Dion wanted to use my dead husband's honorable sacrifice to wipe away his own dirty criminal debts. Paige and Barbara were eagerly helping him do it, just so they could keep shopping for designer handbags and bragging at their country club. The utter disrespect made a cold, righteous fury settle deep into my bones. They were not just stealing from me. They were spitting on Mark's grave. I set the silver frame back down on the nightstand and tapped the top of it twice, a silent promise to the man I loved. I was going to finish his work tonight. I was going to tear down the criminal empire funding my family's lavish lifestyle, and I was going to make sure they faced the devastating consequences of their own toxic greed. Just as I turned toward the bedroom door, my civilian cell phone buzzed loudly on the bed. The screen lit up, illuminating the dark room. It was a text message from my mother, Barbara. I picked up the phone and read the notification. "I brought the transfer papers for Mark's insurance," Barbara wrote, her words dripping with condescending authority. "Do not embarrass us tonight, Hannah. Just tap out the second you get in the ring and sign the paper so Dion does not have to break your jaw. Be a good girl for once in your life." I stared at the screen, feeling a dark smile pull at the corners of my mouth. They were so incredibly confident in their own manufactured reality. They genuinely believed I was walking to my own slaughter. With steady, calm fingers, I typed my reply. "See you tonight." I parked my sedan 2 blocks away from the venue. The thumping bass from Dion's new mixed martial arts facility echoed through the damp night air. The building was a massive converted warehouse. Blinding red and blue neon lights flashed across the exterior, illuminating a chaotic line of people waiting to get inside. I pulled the hood of my dark jacket up and walked toward the staff entrance. The parking lot was a glaring testament to the criminal enterprise operating behind closed doors. Expensive imported sports cars sat parked next to lifted trucks. I recognized the license plates from my team's surveillance files. The high-ranking lieutenants of the East Coast Narcotics Cartel had arrived. They were here to collect their stolen $200,000, and they expected a bloody show before they got paid. I bypassed the main line and approached the side door. Two massive bouncers stood guard. I gave them my name. One of them smirked and unhooked the velvet rope, letting me inside. The air inside the building was thick and oppressive. It smelled of stale beer, cheap cologne, and sweat. The main arena was packed with local toughs, gym members, and criminals hiding in plain sight. In the center of the room stood the octagon. The black chain-link fence gleamed under the harsh overhead spotlights. Above the cage, a giant digital timer glowed bright red. I kept my eyes scanning the room, mapping the tactical layout. I noted the secondary exits, the blind spots, and the structural support columns. My gaze drifted up to the elevated VIP balcony. I saw them immediately. 5 men in tailored suits sitting behind a row of tinted glass partitions. They were not drinking. They were not cheering. They sat perfectly still, watching the floor with predatory focus. They were the cartel bosses, holding Dion's life in their hands. I needed to make my way to the locker rooms to prepare for the bout. But as I stepped into the dimly lit corridor leading away from the main floor, a sharp voice called out my name. Hannah. I stopped and turned. My sister Paige stepped out from the shadows of an intersecting hallway. She was wearing a skin-tight designer dress and holding a clipboard. She was not alone. Flanking her on either side were 2 of Dion's gym enforcers. They were heavily tattooed men with cauliflower ears and aggressive postures. They crossed their thick arms and glared at me, attempting to look intimidating. To a civilian, they might have been terrifying. To me, they were just untrained muscle who would drop in exactly 3 seconds if I targeted their throat and knee joints. "What are you supposed to be wearing?" Paige asked, looking me up and down with absolute disdain. Her eyes swept over my tactical combat pants and moisture-wicking compression shirt. "Are you trying to play soldier tonight? You look completely ridiculous. I told you to just bring the check and tap out." "I am wearing what I need to wear, Paige," I said, keeping my voice low and completely steady. "Where is Dion?" "My husband is getting ready for his grand entrance," Paige said, her chin raised in arrogance. "He is the star of the show. You are just the warm-up act. But before you go out there and make a complete fool of yourself, we have some mandatory paperwork to handle." She shoved the heavy wooden clipboard hard against my chest. I caught it before it could drop. "It is just a standard liability waiver for the gym," Paige said, waving her hand dismissively. "Dion's lawyers require everyone who steps into the cage to sign it. It just says the facility is not responsible if you get hurt tonight. Sign it right now so we can get this over with." I held the clipboard and looked down at the document. It was 5 pages of dense legal jargon printed in a tiny font. A panicked, terrified widow, being pressured by 2 thugs and a bullying sister, would have blindly signed the bottom line just to escape the hallway. They would have trusted that it was a standard gym waiver, but I was a special operations major, trained to analyze complex intelligence reports and spot hidden traps. I did not blindly sign anything. I rapidly scanned the dense paragraphs. My eyes skipped the boilerplate language about physical injury and zeroed in on a specific clause buried deep on the 3rd page. My blood ran completely cold. The fury that ignited in my chest was so intense, it threatened to break my perfectly controlled facade. This was not a standard liability waiver. It was a highly illegal, dual-purpose trap designed by a corrupt attorney. I read the hidden clause again to make sure I was not mistaken. The legal jargon explicitly stated that if I suffered a sudden medical emergency tonight, resulting in a loss of consciousness or incapacitation, I voluntarily surrendered temporary power of attorney to my sister Paige. It granted her immediate legal control over all my financial assets, including my bank accounts and Mark's life insurance policy. But that was not the part that made me want to snap the neck of every person standing in this hallway. The very next paragraph contained an emergency guardianship provision. It stated that, in the event of my hospitalization, Paige would be granted immediate, temporary custody of my 7-year-old daughter, Lily. They were not just planning to beat me unconscious and steal my dead husband's money. They had orchestrated a legal scheme to kidnap my child while I was bleeding in a hospital bed. Dion and Paige were willing to hand me over to the emergency room and take my daughter just to save Dion from the cartel. The sheer evil of their plan was beyond anything I had anticipated from my own family. I looked up from the clipboard. Paige was staring at me, tapping her high heel against the concrete floor impatiently. The two thugs stepped a few inches closer, trying to box me into the wall. "Well," Paige snapped, "are you going to sign it, or do I need to have Dion come out here and break your fingers before the fight even begins?" I stared at my sister. The sheer delusion it took for her to threaten me with two low-level gym enforcers was almost laughable. I was calculating the exact amount of force required to drop both men to the concrete floor when a sharp, familiar voice echoed down the corridor. "That will not be necessary, Paige." My mother Barbara stepped out from the VIP elevator lobby. She was wearing a designer pantsuit and a diamond necklace bought entirely with laundered drug money. She waved her hand dismissively at the two heavily tattooed men. "Give us a moment. I need to speak with my daughter in private." The two thugs backed away without a word. Barbara grabbed my arm, and her perfectly manicured nails digging sharply into my tactical jacket, and pulled me into an empty locker room off the main hall. Paige followed closely behind, locking the heavy metal door behind us. The thumping bass of the arena music was muffled in here, replaced by the harsh hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of industrial bleach. Barbara turned to face me. She deployed the exact same psychological warfare she had used to keep me small and compliant my entire childhood. "You are making a terrible mistake, Hannah," she began, her voice dropping to a low, menacing register. "You have always been so stubborn, so desperately trying to prove you are strong when everyone knows you are falling apart. Mark is gone. He is not coming to save you. You are completely alone." She stepped closer, invading my personal space. I kept my posture rigid, deliberately holding back my combat instincts. "If you do not sign that paper right now, I have Child Protective Services on speed dial," Barbara threatened her, eyes flashing with cruel intent. "I have a friend at the state office. I will call her tonight. I will tell them you are having a severe mental breakdown after Mark's death. I will tell them you dragged your innocent child to a violent cage fight, surrounded by criminals, and abandoned her. They will take Lily away from you before the night is over. You will be locked in a psychiatric ward, and I will make sure you never see your daughter again." I felt a surge of pure, unfiltered rage burn through my veins. Threatening my daughter was the ultimate line crossed. My family was entirely willing to destroy my life and tear my child from my arms just to protect a criminal. But I kept my expression carefully arranged in a mask of sheer terror. I forced my breathing to become shallow and erratic. "You would not do that to Lily," I whispered, forcing my voice to tremble exactly the way a frightened civilian would. "She is your granddaughter." "I absolutely will," Barbara snapped, pointing a sharp finger at my chest. "Lily deserves a stable home, not a broken widow who cannot even manage a simple bank transfer. Sign the paper, Hannah. You go out there right now, you let Dion knock you out quickly, and you wake up safely in the hospital. Paige takes temporary custody of Lily and manages the insurance money, so Dion can secure his investment. You get to keep your child, eventually, once you prove you are stable. If you fight us on this, you lose everything tonight. I will personally see to it." I analyzed the situation rapidly. They were truly desperate. The cartel deadline had them backed into a corner so tight they were willing to commit blatant extortion and child endangerment. As a special operations major, I knew that getting the targets to relax was absolutely crucial for the success of the impending raid. If I fought back now, or incapacitated the thugs outside, Dion might panic. The cartel bosses watching from the balcony might get spooked and try to flee. The entire operation would be severely compromised, resulting in a chaotic shootout. I needed to give my family exactly what they wanted. I needed to play the role of the ultimate scapegoat. I let my shoulders slump forward, perfectly mimicking defeat. I looked down at the concrete floor, breathing heavily as if I were having a full-blown panic attack. I allowed a single tear to fall down my cheek, playing the part of the shattered, grieving mother who had been completely broken by her powerful family. "Please do not take my baby," I sobbed, pulling the heavy wooden clipboard to my chest. "I will sign it. Just promise you will not call social services. I will do whatever Dion wants in the cage." Paige sneered, yanking a gold-plated pen from her expensive designer purse and shoving it violently into my hand. "Then stop crying and just sign the damn paper so we can get this over with. Dion is waiting, and we have important guests upstairs." I took the pen. My hand shook intentionally as I scrawled my signature on the bottom line of the fraudulent power of attorney and emergency guardianship document. I pressed hard enough to make it look desperate. I handed the clipboard back to my sister. Paige snatched it from my grasp, her face breaking into a triumphant, greedy smirk. She looked over at our mother like they had just won the lottery. They honestly believed they had just successfully stolen my daughter and my dead husband's life insurance payout without breaking a sweat. They thought they had legally secured Dion's safety and their own lavish futures. They had absolutely no idea that a contract extorted under extreme duress on behalf of an international money laundering syndicate would be shredded into confetti by a federal judge tomorrow morning. They had just gleefully documented their own federal crimes and handed the physical evidence directly to a military intelligence officer. "Now get out there and take your beating," Paige laughed, waving the signed contract in the air. I turned and walked out of the locker room, keeping my head bowed. The trap was set. The bait was taken. It was time to ring the bell. The heavy metal door of the locker room clicked shut behind me, isolating my mother and sister in their delusions of grandeur. I walked down the dimly lit concrete corridor toward the main arena floor. The pulsing bass of the sound system vibrated up through the soles of my tactical boots. I adjusted the fabric of my compression shirt, making sure it sat perfectly flush against my skin. I checked the zippered pocket on my thigh, where the high-frequency tactical whistle rested. Everything was in place. The operation was moving into its final phase. The booming voice of the master of ceremonies echoed through the massive warehouse. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the main event of the evening." The crowd roared in response. The sound was deafening, a feral mix of drunken cheers and aggressive posturing. "Tonight we celebrate the grand opening of our new facility with a very special exhibition bout," the announcer shouted, hyping up the audience. "Introducing first, fighting out of the blue corner, he stands 6'4", weighing in at 245 pounds. He is your facility owner and former heavyweight champion. Give it up for Dion." The arena lights suddenly went pitch black. A heavy, aggressive hip-hop beat blasted through the oversized speakers, rattling the bleachers. Two massive pillars of fiery pyrotechnics shot up from the entrance ramp, illuminating the smoke-filled room. Dion marched out from behind the curtain, surrounded by an entourage of at least 10 heavily tattooed gym enforcers. He was wearing custom black and gold fighting shorts, his massive chest and arms glistening with sweat and oil. He looked like an absolute juggernaut. The crowd went entirely wild, screaming his name and reaching out to slap his shoulders as he walked down the aisle. Dion did not look at the crowd. He marched straight toward the octagon, but halfway down the ramp he stopped and turned his body toward the elevated VIP balcony. I watched from the shadows of the entrance tunnel as he pounded his chest twice and pointed directly at the tinted glass partition. It was a clear, submissive signal to the cartel lieutenants sitting up there. He was promising them a show. He was promising them their stolen money. He vaulted up the metal stairs and stepped into the cage, pacing like a hungry predator. The music abruptly cut off. The harsh arena lights switched back on, glaring down at the entrance tunnel where I stood. The crowd murmured in confusion. There was no music for me. There were no pyrotechnics or flashy light shows, and his opponent, the announcer said, his voice dripping with barely concealed mockery, Fighting out of the red corner, she stands 5'6", weighing in at 130 pounds. She is making her amateur debut tonight. Let us hear it for Hannah. I stepped out from the darkness of the tunnel into the blinding arena lights. A dead silence fell over the packed warehouse. Hundreds of people stared at me in absolute disbelief. I was not wearing traditional fight gear. I was wearing dark combat pants, reinforced at the knees, and a fitted black compression shirt. My hair was pulled back into a severely tight braided bun. I did not bounce on my toes or raise my fists to the crowd. I walked with the slow, measured precision of a soldier approaching a hostile target. The silence only lasted for 3 seconds before the entire arena erupted. It was not cheering. It was a tidal wave of vicious boos, jeers, and mocking laughter. Grown men leaned over the barricades, pointing and laughing at my tactical boots. Women in the front rows covered their mouths, giggling at my lack of protective gear. They saw a tiny, grief-stricken widow walking to her own execution. Someone from the upper bleachers threw a crumpled plastic cup that landed near my feet. I did not react. I kept my breathing at a steady rhythm, inhaling through my nose and exhaling slowly through my mouth. My heart rate stayed locked at 60 beats per minute. I let my eyes scan the environment, completely ignoring the insults hurled in my direction. I cataloged the positions of Dion's security guards at the main exits. I noted the blind spots near the secondary fire escapes. I glanced up at the VIP balcony, confirming the cartel members were leaning forward in their seats, eager to